Hello and welcome to the Pursuit Zone. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and I interview explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 180 with Chris Haag and Sophie George. I catch up with them while they are in Colombia, and we talk about their cycling adventure so far from Alaska to Argentina. Let's start the show, and let me introduce my guests. In the summer of 2018, Chris Haag and Sophie George began cycling south from Homer, Alaska, toward their goal of reaching Ushuaia, Argentina. With North America behind them, they are currently in Colombia, and you can follow their adventure at their website, theplacesip.com. Chris and Sophie, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thank you so much for having us, Paul.
Pleasure to be here, Paul. Thank you.
Before you began this trip, what were you guys doing?
Well, we were living in southern Utah in a nice little outdoor town called St. George, and Soph was a professor at a university there, and I was self-employed at the time. I was doing small business consulting.
And what got you interested in the idea of doing a cycle tour?
That's kind of a difficult question to answer. We were hardcore commuters when we're living in St. George, by which I mean I commuted every day, all of 1.6 miles to work every day. And I don't know, I guess bikes increasingly became important to us for as a means of transport, but for environmental reasons primarily. I mean, honestly, before setting off on this trip, we were absolute newbies at bike touring.
Not absolutely. We did one tour.
I was about to say, darling. We'd done one tour across Michigan, which was, 5 days from Detroit to the west side of the state. Absolutely nothing like what we've embarked on here.
But you can learn everything that you need to know for a 2-year cycle tour in a 5-day cycle tour.
You could have been stuck in the world of just thinking about, commuter bikes and that whole realm. What was it that, what inspired you? What websites did you see or books that you read that opened you up to the whole world of cycle touring?
I think for me, it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago when we were living in Detroit, and the city just has a really great bike culture. And I had never heard of cycle touring before, but I've always been into backpacking. And somebody brought it up in a conversation at a bike shop or something, the idea that they were going on tour with their bike. And I think I probably just had a bunch of questions about it. And then probably within a month of hearing about bike touring was when I think we probably went and did that first tour that we did across Michigan. And then on that one, I think as soon as it was the second day, I remember the moment that it happened when we got into the countryside of Michigan. And I just remember being on the bike thinking, this is the best way to travel. And I want to do something big on a bike.
And I would say that in terms of websites and that sort of thing that got us really kind of jazzed up about doing a big trip was a website called Warm Showers, which really, really deserves a plug. It's essentially couch surfing, that kind of, sharing ethos, no money changes hands, but it's specifically for bicycle tourists. You put yourself on there as a host, and then people can see that you're willing to host them. And, the idea is that the minimum you offer them is a warm shower. But of course, in reality, most people offer you somewhere to stay. That might be camping in their yard, or it could be having their spare room. It really, really varies. But most of the people that are on that website have toured themselves and therefore know something about what it's like to be on tour and what you might want when you show up at someone's house. We've used it a lot on this trip, but we also hosted people mostly when we were living in Utah. So we would get people coming through who are on trips like this, cycling from Vancouver to Ushuaia, for instance. And I think for me, that was really like, this is a thing that normal people do. And we could do this.
So your website name is a little unusual. How did you guys come up with the idea for that name?
That's all soap. It's mostly soap.
So when we moved to Utah, I had this running joke with myself, as all best jokes are, that I had my life had shifted from peeing in kind of regular places like bathrooms to peeing in fantastic places like overlooking the Grand Canyon, or in Zion National Park, with an eagle 3 feet from your face. And I had this kind of running joke with myself about how I should have an Instagram account of all these fantastic places that I now pee. So then when we were talking about website names, we realized that really essentially what we were doing was going on a grand peeing tour of wonderful places in the world.
I'm curious if you have tried to obtain any sponsorship and if that the name of your website has stood in the way of that.
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that we've really got enough of a following at this point to have like big sponsors, but we had one opportunity where, I had a friend that was working at an ad agency and we had talked about the possibility of doing something with one of their clients. And they did say that the name was, the name would be
too edgy was the phrase they used.
Was it too edgy?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I guess you probably won't see us being sponsored by Disney.
So you guys decided to go Alaska to Argentina. Were there any other routes that you considered?
No, there weren't.
No.
Why Alaska to Argentina?
I really wanted to learn Spanish, so that was a big draw for me. Actually, I guess I made a pitch early on for starting in Mexico, essentially going from Utah where we were living and just heading south and spending the whole time in Mexico and south from there. But Chris made a reasonable argument, one, from the completeness of cycling from the top of the world to the bottom, and then two, kind of practicing in the US, like figuring out what bike touring, long distance and long term, looked like in a culture that we were familiar with and in a language that we could speak. And actually crossing the border was obviously a major milestone for us, and I'm in hindsight glad that I was at least physically prepared and somewhat mentally prepared for what we were doing by that time.
Tell me about your bikes. What are you guys riding?
We've both got Surleys. I think it's a 2013 Troll, kind of like a mountain bike sort of geometry to the frame, and then Soph's got a disc trucker, and they're both set up with 26-inch wheels. They're fairly primitive bikes. The idea behind it is that nothing's really lightweight. Everything's kind of robust, strong components, and should be things that are easy to find just about anywhere in the world. So it's got older style wheels and shifting components and everything like that. Although actually we've kind of recently found that most of the world is further along in biking technology than we were told on other people's blogs, and actually like going with the 26-inch wheels and stuff like that wasn't the best move. Every time we have a tire or a wheel or tube issue, people seem to be wondering why we have these old mountain bike wheels.
That's a good point. Those blogs are getting out of date.
Yeah, definitely.
But what do you have for your gear setup? Do you have the traditional 4 panniers on your bikes?
Yeah, we do. We've each got 4 panniers, and at this point, we've slimmed down a little bit since we started. I think originally we had some stuff strapped on to the top of the rear rack as well. But yeah, at this point, we're running pretty light. On my bike, in one front pannier, I've got all my clothing. In the other front pannier, I've got the tent and our sleeping pad. In the other pannier, I've got our food, and the other one is kind of miscellaneous stuff, computer, chair, shoes, and a drone.
That's the bag that you could get rid of.
Right, yeah.
I think it's the stuff you really don't need.
Right. Well, I don't need to carry your food either.
Do you use that drone much?
More right now. The drone is a
Chris has a love-hate relationship with the drone.
it's a mixed bag of emotions. It's
like a disobedient pet because we're not that good at using it. So you think it's going to follow you down the road, and then it turns away and flies off in the opposite direction. It's quite stressful sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
But it gets great shots.
What kind of drone is it?
It's a Mavic Air.
Sorry, I'm not that familiar. Is that one of the small ones or one of the bigger ones?
It's one of the little ones. It's their travel drone that they basically market it to people like us that, either for backpacking trips or, when you're out in the back country on your bike or hiking and stuff like that. They're pretty small and lightweight.
Does it weigh like 1 to 2 pounds?
Maybe 2 to 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're small.
So how did you get yourselves up to the starting point?
That was a whole adventure in and of itself. So we flew to Seattle and then took the train to Bellingham, Washington. And from there, we got on the Marine Highway, the ferry that goes up through the Inside Passage. It's a kind of a working man's cruise is maybe one way to describe it. Like it's a very kind of utilitarian boat, absolutely no luxury on it. Yeah, we were on it for 6 days and it's the Inside Passage is just fantastic. I mean, absolutely beautiful. You spend the whole time out on deck looking at whales and hoping you're going to see a bear on the shores and all of that. It's wonderful.
And you can get a cabin on it if you want, or you can tape your tent to the deck of the boat, which is what we did.
Tape. So the tape the tape is mandatory to use duct tape?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that it's mandatory, but it gets pretty windy out there. So you definitely want it secured because it's just sitting on the deck of the boat for 5 or 6 days. It's great. I mean, you wake up in your tent on the boat. It's kind of like sleeping on top of the washing machine or the dryer, nice little vibration below you. And then, you get to look out at the Inside Passage and all the mountains and the occasional whale as you're floating around.
Chris's grandma came with us, so that was a really great part of it for us. So she's a wonderful, energetic, adventurous 80-something year old.
87.
I was going to protect her.
Oh yeah. 67.
67, yeah. Fantastic woman, and so she came with us for that whole trip and was there to see us off. So we landed in Homer, Alaska, and then spent a couple of days kind of getting the bikes built up and all packed up and ready, and then she got to wave us off on our first day.
Were there any other people with their tents taped to the deck?
There were.
A couple of others.
Yeah, there were a couple others. Yeah.
Do they have like an area set aside where they say this is where you can put your tents, or you can just kind of go wherever you want?
No, there's a whole little tent area. They've got a few different boats. I've actually rode the Marine Highway system twice, and the first time they had a really, really huge area when there were probably 15 to 20 tents on it. But when we took it this past time, I think there were only 2 or 3 others.
How was the travels in Alaska?
Spectacular. Alaska was built for bike touring. The views, you could just kick your camera down the road and you're not going to get a bad shot. And as far as the riding goes, it's like every town is 50 to 100, well, actually, no, more like 50 to 250 miles apart. And so you just kind of end up in the wilderness for anywhere from 1 to 5 days, and then you resupply, and then you're back in the middle of nowhere.
And you might be resupplying at a gas station. I mean, we went, we went
up to 5 days without food, I think.
Yeah, but even between grocery stores, it was more than that. So you can go up to 5 days without coming across any kind of shop, and then when you do, it's a gas station, where you can buy macaroni and cheese and tin sausages.
We went 600 miles once without a proper grocery store. That's what it was.
Right. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, I would say. But yeah, as Chris says, it's absolutely beautiful. We were really lucky with the weather, so it can get really rained out. At least I remember it being pretty lovely.
Yeah, we got lucky.
And there's kind of nothing to do but ride. So you just get into, because there's nothing to stop for, whereas in most other parts of our journey, there's shops and people and things happening and just lots of distractions somehow. Up there, there's just nothing. So you're just going from lake to lake and tree to tree, and you just get into we got into a really good groove of riding a lot of miles and camping everywhere. Of course, it's beautiful.
And in the summertime, you can ride all day because it's sunny. I mean, you've got daylight until 2-3 o'clock in the morning. You can easily ride until 6 or 7 in the evening and then not have to worry about setting up camp and cooking in the dark and kind of take your time with everything that way. That area was by far one of my favorite parts.
And you're riding on paved roads?
Throughout Alaska most of the time, although the Denali Highway that we did, that was pretty rough dirt roads and I guess parts of Denali National Park. But for the most part, we stick to paved roads. I'd say probably 80% of the time.
Are you riding with a lot of traffic?
Generally, no, but there's more traffic overall, I think, now that we've gotten into Latin America. It's just more densely populated down here, so towns are usually 20 or 30 miles apart at the most. There's more cars on the road, but unless we're in a city, it's usually not super busy.
There's also more public transport here, so
Right.
buses and stuff are a much bigger feature down here than they are in the States or Canada. So I would say you're being passed by buses an awful lot of the time.
Right.
Yeah, but it will start to thin out again. As we start to go south through South America, it starts to get less densely populated again. And I think we're both quite excited about that prospect as well, because camping is so much easier when you've got less people around as well.
How was your time through Canada? Was it very similar to Alaska?
Canadians would describe themselves as Alaskans without guns. They're all really, really friendly. Or actually, no, it was Alaskans describe themselves as Canadians with guns.
You should start that again. You have this opportunity.
Canada was really, it's basically in the northern part, it's just like Alaska. It's big, it's empty. There's bears, there's moose. You're going 3 to 5 days without a place to resupply on food. And everywhere you look, it's just beautiful.
Did you stop in any big cities like Vancouver?
Yes, yeah, we did, and we loved Vancouver. Actually, I have a good old friend from graduate school and another kind of work colleague who live in Vancouver. So we stopped for 3 or 4 days and stayed with really good friends. So it was a lovely break. And actually, probably one of my favorite single rides actually 2 things on that same day. So one of our bear encounters was that morning.
Oh, yeah.
So we woke up, we'd had a warm showers host, and we were riding into Vancouver. So we had our guard down a little bit with respect to bears, because, you're about to arrive in a big city. You're just not kind of thinking along those terms anymore. And so we left the house of this warm showers host. We went immediately down quite a steep hill. We're both kind of, still rubbing our eyes, waking up. And Chris was ahead. And as he got to the bottom of the hill, it then started to climb very, very quickly. And our host had warned us about this hill, so we knew it was coming up. As he descended the hill and kind of got to the top of the hill, a bear poked its head up out of the bushes, snacking on berries for breakfast, all of 15 feet away from him. And his thought process was, if I shout, I draw attention to myself, and I'm probably, Soph's going to figure it out. Either she won't see it or she'll figure it out pretty quickly. So I'll just, ride as fast as I can up this hill and get away from this bear. So of course I come, plowing down the hill, get to the bottom, and exactly the same thing, see the bear. It means that I got freaked and forgot to change gears appropriately. So then I hit the trough of the hill and started climbing, and immediately ground to a halt and had to get off and walk my bike, keeping a close eye on this bear who couldn't have cared less. He was, like I say, he was busy eating breakfast. But then, we took a couple of ferries, or a ferry that day, and landed in Vancouver, 30 kilometers, I think, outside of the city. And our bikes attract some attention. So as we were putting our bikes on the ferry, another cyclist started talking to us about our trip, and turned out that he had at one point held the world record for riding from Cape Town to Cairo, and was also heading into Vancouver in basically the direction we were, and just said, I can just show you, come with me. So of course it's always stressful when you're riding into a city that you don't know and dealing with traffic and all of that. So we just had this wonderful host who guided us to our front door, to my friend's house in the city, and then bid his farewell. So it's a great ride into a fantastic city.
3 or 4 days in Vancouver. What's the longest so far that you've taken or that you've stopped your tour to just stay in one place?
St. George.
St. George, probably. Utah. We lived in St. George before starting the trip, and so we've got friends there, and actually our pets are both still there. We've got a dog and a cat that are staying with friends there. We made a point to ride through southern Utah and stop through, and I think we 3 weeks. Yeah. Mexico City, 10 days.
Medellin.
We'll be here. Yeah, we're in Medellin right now in Colombia, and we'll probably be here for about 10 days. But I think that 3 weeks in St. George would have been the longest.
Do you find those kind of breaks to be a necessity on your journey?
Necessity? I don't know if I would go that far, but I miss home. I'm not even sure what home is. I miss having a home and unpacking bags and having a kitchen to cook in and that sort of stuff. So stopping somewhere is good in terms of feeling like you got a base for a second. But physically, I think physically after 4 or 5 days, I feel about as recovered as I possibly can. And yeah, I don't need more time off the bike in that sense. We've been off the bikes for 6, 7, 8 days at this point, and we just went to pick them up from a bike shop and rode them across town back to where we're staying. And I was kind of like, oh, back on the bike. It feels good. I guess feel a bit sedentary. Otherwise, we tend to eat a lot of cake when we stop anywhere.
What were some of the highlights of your trip through the U.S.?
The Oregon coast was good.
Yeah.
Oregon was great. And I think that for me, one of the things, maybe 2 things that I've gained an appreciation for about the U.S. is that how big and open it is. I think I always took that for granted, especially in the Southwest. You just don't get that. You don't get that as much once you get down into Latin America. It's more densely populated, and it's kind of hard to find those big stretches where you can even have an entire day of not coming across signs of civilization, let alone 3 or 5 days of that. For me, the deserts of the U.S. and the Southwest are just amazing. Like going through Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and even Northeast California.
And Oregon. Oregon.
In Eastern Oregon. Like I had no idea that when we hit Bend, Oregon, which is sort of in the middle, that from there we were in the desert for something like 6 months, all the way Oregon, California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and into Mexico. It was nothing but desert. It's so beautiful. It's so quiet at night. And now that we've hit the rainy season in Central and South America, I think we both really, really miss the desert. There's something to be said for knowing that your underwear and your shirt's going to be dry in the morning.
This is a question I haven't asked for a while when talking to cycle tourists, but I'm wondering if anybody along the way so far has thrown anything at you from their car.
I've had, not from a car, but I've had a couple pieces of fruit thrown at me. Oh. Yeah.
You mean in a nice way?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, you weren't there.
Oh.
It was when I was riding through Sinaloa, Mexico. And yeah, one morning, a few guys just, I heard something hit the ground, kind of like a nice little thud behind me. And I turned around and there were 3 guys they had a whole truckload of mangoes or something like that. And they sent 3 of them rocketing my way, but their aim wasn't that good.
You make it into Mexico, and tell me about your time in Mexico.
I think our experience in Mexico can be reasonably summarized by saying we were planning to spend 2 to 3 months there, and we reluctantly crossed the border into Guatemala after 5 months. We dawdled. We
loved it.
Yeah, we took a really obscure route we crossed the border from Arizona into actually last point on the US, that one of the best little towns in the US called Bisbee, Arizona. And so we crossed the border into the Sonoran Desert and then headed in the direction of in the direction of the coast and Baja, California. And then from there, we just kind of zigzagged because we heard about so many things to visit. And it's a country which is so varied, much in the same way the US is. Yes, there's desert areas, but there's also tropical areas. There's fantastic beaches, both on the Gulf of Mexico and as well as on the Pacific side. Thank you. You can just see anything you want to see, and the food is wonderful.
And the history.
Yeah, towns are beautiful.
Yeah, they've got some of the most beautiful cities that I've ever seen.
My summaries are having moved from London or from the UK 10 years ago to the States. I've always said that my distinction between Europe and America is that Europe wins hands down on human-made wonders. It has fantastic architecture, but the US beats Europe hands down on geographical wonders, Grand Canyon and things like that. I mean, you just don't get that in Europe. But having spent that much time in Mexico, I think it has both of those things. It has 500-year-old churches and, fantastic old colonial cobbled streets, colonial cities, as well as having just, the most incredible scenery.
And the people there are so friendly. Our very first day, I remember, and you just don't get things like this in the States, where we were kind of on this fun little winding road going through some foothills in the desert. And it was like every car that drove past, people would be hanging out the windows, like hands in the air, screaming and waving and smiling. Yeah, they'd all yell, "Que Cheeto," which basically means like awesome. And that's, it kind of just went like that throughout the whole country. It was like everybody is super interested in what you're doing, and they all, they want you to have a good time there, and they want to somehow help facilitate you having a good time there. And they always want to know, like, hey, what do you think of our country? It's beautiful, right? It's fun here. All the people are friendly, right? And, they invite you over for dinner and drinks, and it's an amazing country.
So at this point, are you guys still camping? Or are you able to find warm showers hosts? Or are you staying able to afford to stay in hotels?
Our camping is, we don't camp nearly as much right now. It's a lot harder to find a camping spot. And when you do, it's usually not a wild camping spot. It's more like we go to a restaurant on the roadside and ask if we can put the tent up out behind their place, because there just aren't spots where we can go and just find a place in the woods to pitch the tent.
And we've never been turned down, right? We've never gone to a restaurant and said, hey, would you, we'll eat in the restaurant. Is there any chance we could throw our tent and spend the night? No one's ever said no. And they're like, oh, and we have a shower and we have a bathroom you can use.
And warm showers isn't as big down here as it is in the States. What we kind of just figured out is that couch surfing is much more popular down here. So we've been starting to use that to find some places to stay. And then we've also done hotels and hostels quite a bit lately too. I think more than we expected to. Mm-hmm. Those things, a lot of times you can find a decent hotel room for like $12 down here. So it's not too hard on the pocketbook.
What about the food in Mexico? Did you guys enjoy that?
Oh my gosh.
We were pretty skinny when we rolled into Utah. And then by the time we rolled the kind of next major stop in Mexico City, I want to say we gained 10 pounds probably because we enjoyed the food so much.
Yeah. Oh, when you're on the coast, the seafood there is unreal. And every region, and even sometimes city by city, they've got their own cuisine. The ceviche was unreal. I ate crickets a couple times, which was really good. I liked them. Soph didn't like them so much, but I thought they're kind of salty and crunchy, like chips or something like that.
Soph decided she didn't like them without trying them.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Well, how are they prepared?
I think they're basically just pan fried with some salt and spices. And then they usually kind of mix them in with guacamole or something like that. And you just, dip your tortilla chips and, mashed avocado and crickets. It's good.
So you guys rode your bikes into Mexico City?
No, we rode our bikes out of Mexico City, but people told us that it was so like dramatically terrible riding into Mexico City because of how big and busy it was. We decided to have a rest day and throw the bikes on a bus and bus into the city for the last, 30 miles or something like that. But we rode out of the city, and actually it wasn't that bad. It is one of the best days of riding, I think, that we had. They had we stumbled across a bike path that was like 60 miles long. We only had to ride in the streets of the city for maybe
10 kilometers, I think, 6 miles.
And there was one day when we had to pick the bikes up I had to pick my bike up from a bike shop because I had a broken wheel that had to get replaced. I will say that was an amazingly dramatic day of riding a bike. And it was only like 4 miles, and it's like you got so many things happening, cars coming the wrong direction, motorcycles, people randomly walking across the street. Of course, there's like the cliche thing with like the two guys carrying like a giant pane of glass through the middle of the road, and I almost ride through it. Construction workers swinging beams around and stuff like that. It was like the one of the craziest experiences on a bike that I've had.
Actually, another one more dramatic than anything we did in Mexico City was riding into Medellin, which we did a week ago, and of course it's so hard to pick a route. You're going blind into everything. You have no idea what you're about to come across, and we were heading into town on a 3-lane highway, of which we were, of course, on the far right, which then you could see it coming, the sinking feeling when you realize the road is sweeping around to join a 4-lane highway coming in from the right. So we're now right in the middle of 7 lanes of traffic, and there was a shoulder in the middle, kind of a berm, I guess, where the two roads met. So we stopped at that to try to figure out what to do. So they're probably moving at 60 miles an hour. It was probably the most dangerous situation we've been in, and we just had no idea how to cross this freeway to get over to the right. And then one car in our lane stopped and put their hazard lights on, and then the car in the lane immediately to our right stopped and put their hazards on. So we kind of snuck out one lane across, and then the car coming up there, put their hazards on and pulled to a halt. And so one by one, every lane came to a stop to let us cross. It's just like, this is just incredible.
The drivers down here are simultaneously amazingly daring with how close they will pass you on a road, but at the same time incredibly friendly. Like, you never feel like anybody's trying to push you around on the road or anything like that. They always try to make room and a lot of times just let you have space to be safe. But then other times it's like you'll be on a mountain road and there'll be a semi-truck passing a semi-truck in 30-foot visibility of fog in the middle of a 120-degree hairpin turn. Those moments are a little bit more stressful.
That is a cool story. I don't think that would happen in the United States. I think you'd...
No. We would have died
You
there.
would die.
Yeah. We died of starvation. We just would have waited
Right.
for weeks.
Best case scenario, someone would have took pity on you and called the police, and maybe the police would have helped.
Right. Absolutely.
They'd confiscate our bikes.
Yeah, write you a ticket.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about after you get out of Mexico and into Guatemala, and then your time through that part of the world and then into the Darien Gap, because this is a part of the world where, at least in the U.S. media, we hear about it being so dangerous. Don't go to Central America because it's, there's so much crime. What was your experience like traveling through there?
Overall, sort of just like we said with Mexico, I mean, people were unbelievably friendly, like over the top friendly. I think that in places like that where they know that they have a bad reputation, people go above and beyond to sort of show you that it's not everything that you read in the paper, and that, there's good people in these places. You don't have to feel afraid traveling through them. And I think that maybe the best one, I don't know why, but for me it was El Salvador, that I was kind of most nervous of crossing the border that day. Guatemala a little bit too, but for some reason, I think, El Salvador and Honduras, they've got maybe the worst reputations down there. And we're crossing the border, and maybe 30 minutes after we got over, and it was pretty uneventful. It was like, you go, you fill out your questionnaire, you cross a bridge. I think maybe the immigration guy was asleep at the booth, and we kind of had to like wake him up to get our passport stamp or something like that. Yeah. But then not too far after crossing the border, we see this, like, all these mangoes on the ground next to the road, this tree, like everything had just ripened up on it. And so we stopped just to grab some mangoes and have a little snack. And some guy pulled up and approached us, and he started talking. And at first, I don't remember what exactly, but I think maybe I thought he was going to ask us for $1 or something like that. But it seemed like he saw us eating all these mangoes from the ground, and he must have thought that we were hungry, because he had this giant bag of cookies, and he was like, here, if you're hungry, you can have these cookies. And it was like 2 pounds of cookies. I didn't want to carry it on my bike, but he really, really insisted that we take them. And so
we ate cookies for 3 days straight.
It was like 3 days of eating cookies. And then actually the other great one too, also in El Salvador, was we met a guy on the side of the road, and we chatted for a few minutes at like this really nice overlook on the Pacific coast. And all of a sudden he pulled a knife out and he handed it to me, and I asked him, is this for protection? And he was like, no, it's mango season. You're going to want a knife to peel mangoes.
Looked at you like you were crazy.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think that one sums it up pretty well.
Like I said, we really liked Mexico, and after 5 months we felt really comfortable in Mexico. And so then crossing any border invokes some element of anxiety, and as you say, because the reputation is such in the States, what you hear about Central America as being so dangerous, we were definitely nervous crossing into Guatemala. And that first day in Guatemala, we ended up at a balneario, like a kind of a public outdoor swimming pool complex where it was also possible to camp. And we got adopted by a family. We rolled in at 5 o'clock, and within half an hour we were being force-fed tacos and carne asada and beers and brought into the fold of this family. And it doesn't take long in any of those countries for the people there to put any anxiety that you have completely to bed. I loved El Salvador. We probably spent 7 days in El Salvador. And so that's the other funny thing, you go from Alaska, Canada, the States, and then Mexico, where we were spending weeks and weeks, more than a month in each of those places. And then you get to Guatemala, and we really took our time through Guatemala. We took some breaks with a friend.
We were still only there for 3 weeks.
Yeah. I think it was something like we could have ridden it in 7 days had we actually, just pushed to ride through. And Honduras, we were in for 36 hours. It was, essentially 2 days of riding. Chris has a place in his heart for Nicaragua.
Oh yeah, Nicaragua is one of the best, I think, as far as places in Latin America go to travel. It's amazingly cheap. The people are super friendly. It's really quiet as far as tourism goes, because it's got one of the sort of, again, like El Salvador and Honduras, it's got that reputation. Everybody overlooks it, and they go to either Costa Rica or Guatemala, it seems like, and then Panama as well, and I guess Belize too. Mm-hmm. But Nicaragua is super, super beautiful. It's really easy to get around, and it's kind of more adventurous because they're not really set up for tourism. And so where you go to Costa Rica and it's like you can do anything you want, and all you have to do is get in line and give somebody $20. Whereas in Nicaragua, that there's a river somewhere, and there's probably some boats that go down that river to take you to the Caribbean coast.
But the internet tells you nothing.
Yeah, but you can't. Yeah, it's like a country that's completely offline. Like people don't use Yelp or things like that, where you can just go and look up how to do something there. So it's this really, really fun social adventure where if you're interested in doing certain things, you kind of just have to show up in town and start asking around, how do I find a boat to take me down this river, or how do I get to that mountain over there, or something like that. Yeah, it's one of my favorite countries because of that.
Sophie, how's your goal of learning Spanish coming along?
Bien. It's okay. It's slow. We're in the middle of a week. Part of the reason for spending a chunk of time here in Medellin is that we're both having private Spanish lessons. So 4 hours a day. So I want to be able, that's what we were talking about the other day. If I had the choice, I would take a pill that meant that I kind of immediately learned it and could speak it perfectly. Whereas Chris really, really enjoys the process of acquiring the language. I feel super self-conscious about making mistakes, which is ridiculous. The only way to do it is to accept you're going to make mistakes and dive in and feel safe in the knowledge that everyone wants to talk to you. So, people aren't sitting there judging you for your crappy Spanish. They're really, really, really happy that you know something and that you're willing to try. But yeah, I would say we have functional plus, like we can absolutely navigate getting hotels, restaurants, all of that kind of day-to-day stuff, because obviously we do that a lot. I get more shy when it's having a conversation with someone. We can do it, but it's really, really effortful. But yeah, being on the bikes is hard because we're together all the time, and of course we speak English. My Spanish teacher was telling me we need to allocate an hour a day where we only communicate in Spanish, and that will help. If we don't force ourselves to try to talk to people or stay in people's houses and socialize that way, then you're only ever having those same interactions, right? Like getting a hotel or ordering food and stuff like that. So yeah, you really have to put yourself out there to get to the next level, but we get by.
I think we take for granted too how much the world sort of adjusts to English. Lots of people really want to learn English, so there's a good chance that you'll find somebody, or if somebody's having a hard time understanding you, they'll go find somebody that they know that speaks English if they think it's an important conversation that requires an interpretation. And then also you meet other people that are traveling as well, everybody from Europe and even Asian countries too. Like most people speak English, and I think that we kind of take that for granted. It also makes it harder to learn the Spanish because sometimes it's just so easy to fall back on your own language.
Tell me a little bit more about these classes that you're taking. Are you going to a local school and then you each have your private teacher, or did you find somebody through online?
I guess we've done it both ways, where we've gone to schools before when we've been in towns that have that. Here in Medellin, we just went online and found a couple of individuals that do private classes.
Tomorrow, my teacher and I, it's our final day, and our outing is to go to the Casa de Memoria. So apparently Medellin has a very nice museum of the history of Medellin. So we're gonna go there together and spend 4 hours talking and walking around the museum. And
it sounds like a date.
Yeah, he's much younger than you.
Yeah, but is he going to carry your shampoo and conditioner on his bike?
He's not cycling anywhere.
Are the classes worth it, do you think? Are you enjoying it?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think where I find I plateau, as I was saying, unless you make a real effort to push yourself and do things that are uncomfortable, at least uncomfortable for me, I fall into just saying the things that I'm comfortable saying, and the things that I know I can make myself understood with, rather than, and I tend to just clam up. If I get to a point where I don't know how to say what I want to say, I just don't ask the question. Whereas, having 4 hours a day of one-to-one, we just today we sat in a cafe for 4 hours and just talked. He has me write a story about our travels every day, so I prepare something and then we talk through that. And today he told me a story about the craziest thing that had ever happened to him in his life, and tomorrow I have to come up with a story to tell him back of the most loco thing that's happened to me. So yeah, I mean, you can't help but improve when you're forced to have that intense of an experience with the language.
Has it been a challenge for you guys to keep up your motivation on the bike tour so far?
No.
I don't think so.
The only time that I thought anything along the lines of, I don't know if I'm going to finish this, was really early on. About 6 weeks in, I aggravated a very old back injury of mine, and I was in quite a lot of pain for a week or so, and just, not being able to ride comfortably or sit comfortably or even lie down comfortably, when you're setting up a tent every day and all of that stuff, I really did think, I don't know if I can do this if I'm going to be in chronic pain. But it has got better, and yeah, I feel in pretty physically good shape. Yeah, so that was the only time where I really seriously considered not finishing or not doing it. But every day I get up and I feel fine about getting on the bike.
And I guess to that, I did have months. Actually, it started in the States, but it was at its worst throughout Mexico. And I don't know what happened. At first, I thought it was food poisoning or something, but I had some pretty, we'll just say, aggravating stomach issues that kept coming back for several months. And there were a couple times where I remember sitting in bed or laying in bed in Mexico, I think, in Durango, being in cold sweats for 2 days and thinking if this keeps happening, because it was recurring every 3 weeks for quite a few months. I was getting to the point where it's if my health doesn't improve, I don't know how long I can keep doing this. Luckily, within as we got out of Mexico, it's just gotten better and better. So I don't know if it was if it was related to Mexico, or it could have been something that I picked up in the States, because first time it happened was in the US. But that's really hard, especially, you get sick or you get hurt, and once again, you're in a place where you don't speak the language. To try to have a conversation with a doctor about things like that, a really technical conversation about something that's going on in your body, is incredibly difficult. The frustration of things like that is really magnified.
On the positive side of, why getting up every day, and as long as you're feeling good, as long as your health is in good shape, it's never boring, right? It's you're always shooting for the next thing that you're excited about. I think we've always got a few places kind of earmarked in the country that we really want to see, and that starts off with a really kind of broad lens, and then as we get closer to the time, we get much more specific about exactly what things we're going to see and what route we're going to take, down to the week, and then down kind of day to day even. But because there's so much ahead of you, it's you can get to a great place, but you don't want to stop for too long, because who knows what the next place is going to bring.
Whenever we're in cities, I mean, like we were saying earlier, it's nice to get the break, but when we take 3, 4, or 5 days off, we're usually pretty ready to get moving again. Especially, I know for me, I love being on the move, and I love seeing the scenery change every day. And especially right now in South America, as we're starting to get into the Andes, so it's pretty hard not to be motivated most days to get up and ride.
I want to just take a moment to talk about the Darien Gap, and how did you guys go around that?
Slowly.
This is a really nice lesson about how things work in Latin America, I think. I don't even know where to begin. I guess it was on our minds for months. We probably started thinking about it really as we were getting into Mexico, and we didn't really figure it out until the last minute. And even once we figured it out, it changed a little bit. The Darien Gap, that's the area between Panama and Colombia. And I want to say it's about 90 miles of swamp. People in Panama said that they've never developed it there because it's just this really rich, lush, beautiful, important ecosystem. And they just kind of wanted to leave it that way. And so they've never built a road to connect Colombia and Panama. Some people have said that there are some sort of 2 tracks and footpaths that if you're savvy at route finding, that you can work your way through it, but it's a pretty daunting task. So most people that either fly or take a boat. And so we decided to take a boat, and we looked into a bunch of different things, and it is a little bit pricey. And one thing that you kind of worry about is all the salt water of 5 days at sea kind of rotting your bike away. We ended up finding through a Facebook group, what was his name?
Joel.
Yeah. He had like a 20-foot, it was basically a fishing boat, but like a little fishing boat, like a little motor boat. And this is like a 200-mile trip.
Something like that,
yeah. So it would be like 200 miles on a 15-foot boat. And
there's the islands. So Panama has a group of islands called the San Blas Islands that are, equivalent to Tahiti or, desert islands in the Philippines. If you have an image of what those look like, picture perfect, kind of one palm tree coral islands. The route that you can take is to go and do a kind of a trip through these islands, and then you head for the Colombian coast. We lined up this guy, Yoel, who had this little boat, and that the idea was that we would take 3 days and 2 nights. That would include going and visiting the San Blas Islands, and then he would drop us at a little town, Necoclí, in Colombia. So we agreed that we're going to leave on Friday. We cycle from Panama City. We arrive at the marina. We contact him. He promised us that we were supposed to meet him at 3:00, and at 6:00 we're still sitting outside the marina waiting for this guy to show up, who's repeatedly been telling us that he'll be there in 20 minutes time, or ahorita in Spanish, which is in a moment, but it really could be tomorrow.
There's a reputation down here for not wanting to give you bad news. And so he didn't want to tell us that it wasn't worth the money to only take 2 people. I guess there's 2 things. Like, one, people don't like to give you bad news, and they're also just eternally optimistic. And so he didn't want to tell us that he couldn't just take 2 people. He really thought that he was just going to find 2 more people that wanted to go on a boat to Colombia. And so every day he just kept telling us, we'll leave tomorrow. I had to do this or that. And eventually we kind of figured out that we weren't going to leave unless he found 2 more people, and that was pretty unlikely. And so we sat in this marina for what?
6 days or something?
waiting for him.
But we have waiting for this guy for 6 days. But we made friends. We made friends with the guy that owned the bar. We made friends with the security manager of the marina, and with also the marina, the guy that ran the whole marina, which meant that we were able to pitch our tent in the back of the restaurant and just kind of hang out and get into marina life for 5 days.
And everybody knew that we were looking to get to Colombia, so it kind of got to the point where all the boat captains, they all talk, they all know each other. So anytime somebody was getting ready to head to Colombia, or somebody heard of somebody in the marina heading to Colombia, they'd send them our way to let us know that if we wanted a ride, that they could take us. And the first few days we kept trying to hold out for Yoel, and then eventually we figured out a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, and ended up having it was a really nice catamaran we ended up taking. It was a little bit more money, but it was a much nicer ride than sitting on a little fishing boat for 3 days.
So we spent 6 days sailing through these islands. I sent some pictures to a friend of mine. She said, it looks like you've been sailing through a postcard for the last week, which is exactly how it was. And then we ended up they dropped us in Cartagena. So all told, this is the kind of unpredictability of bike touring. We waited for almost a week, and then it took us 6 days, not 3 days on the boat. And we ended up in Cartagena, not in Necoclí, which added another 600 kilometers of serious riding to our journey. So that whole debacle put us back by 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks probably. So it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got a great story to tell.
Absolutely.
And you didn't have to, that would have been terrible to ride on that boat, I think, with your bikes and then other people. Yikes.
Yeah, it would have been tight.
Yeah.
Well, looking back, what's proved to be, you think, the most challenging part of the journey so far?
Wind.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
For me, it's wind. Like I think I can deal with everything. The rain, it's going to stop pretty soon. Although
the rainy season though.
Yeah. One thing at the year, we're like, there are no challenges. Wait, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
So we're like, wind it's soul destroying because you can set out on a day and think, you look at the topo and it's like, oh, it's pretty flat, and we're trying to get from here to here, and so we've only got X number of miles to ride, and then the wind just kills you. Like you can, a day that should be totally straightforward becomes next to impossible because of the wind. And unlike a hill, which you climb up and you're going to get the joy of going back down again on the other side pretty soon. Hills in general don't last for more than a day or two at the most extreme, but wind can last for weeks. Getting a brutal headwind.
And it's almost never a tailwind. I don't understand. It doesn't matter what direction you're riding. It's always a headwind. Yeah. And then the rainy season too.
Season was tough.
Yeah. I don't think we were prepared, mentally, for how difficult that was going to be, because you just don't realize how much it takes a toll on you in so many ways when your clothes never dry. And so you get done riding at the end of the day, you try to rinse things out, but it's so humid. You get up in the morning, your shirt, your underwear, your riding shorts, everything is still wet. And then, without getting too graphic, the way that wet clothes rub against your body is a little bit different than dry clothes. And I had one day where I rode through the rain for 3 or 4 hours or something like that. And I had my riding gloves on, and I took my riding gloves off at the end of the day. My hands were just complete prunes, and they think they stayed like that for almost another 24 hours just because everything was so wet.
And your stuff smells. It's just horrible. Yeah. It's really hard to feel clean. I think that's the difficult bit.
Right.
If your clothes are wet for 3 days in a row, they inevitably smell.
Well, and if it's raining when you get off the bike, you can't really stretch out. You just want to get in the tent, but then you're sitting in the tent all night, and the tent's warm because it's
still 90
Panama.
degrees.
Yeah.
It's actually the dry season in Colombia right now, and I think Colombia gets a lot of rain most of the year anyway. But the dry season is certainly drier than it was in all of Central America. So pretty much from when we hit Guatemala, we've been in the rainy season,
right?
And it got pretty intense through Nicaragua, Costa Rica,
El Salvador too.
Yeah.
Right.
A couple months of rainy season. We're really excited to be dry.
How's your budget holding up?
I think we're doing pretty well. I think we're spot on.
We did absolute back of a napkin. Literally back of a napkin calculations on what we thought we would spend. So our budget is $2,000 between us every month.
Speak for yourself. I don't do anything without a spreadsheet.
Well, at least you showed it to me on the back of a napkin.
Yeah.
And we were way, way over budget through Alaska, Canada, and the US, sometimes 50% over budget. But ever since we crossed into Mexico, we have been under budget every month. So, sort of $1,700 a month, which means that we're slowly pulling our average down. So we're pretty close to spot on right now, which my guess is will mean that we end up being a bit under by the end of it. Mm-hmm. Big expenses like the boat to Colombia. That was half a month budget. That 200-mile section. We're of the mindset that we're here and it's an interesting one. So we'd say the Spanish lessons, clearly that's a treat, having private lessons for 4 hours a day for a week. That's an expense. It's obviously nowhere near what you'd pay for it in the States. But you gain from that. Obviously you gain from that intellectually and socially, but also in terms of money in the future, because that allows us to have conversations with people, which means that you're more likely to then get invited to someone's house, or, you know, hear about the nice new restaurant down the street that's not the tourist spot, you know, it's the local spot, and all of that stuff. So I think that the Spanish lessons are a really good investment, you know, totally from a financial point of view, all the things that it opens up for you.
Yeah, it's all a good investment. I mean, you guys aren't just in it for the cycling. Otherwise, you'd be done already.
Absolutely. We're taking our time. Yeah, we could ride twice as much as we do and not stop.
Could you?
I mean, I could. Would I want to? No. I'd cry more.
So what's your favorite part about cycle touring?
Oh, the people, for sure. You don't get it when you travel in a car or motorcycle or any other means, I think. But when you pull into a town with a bike that's just loaded up with all your gear, everybody can kind of look at you and know that you're up to something. And everybody's really curious. And it doesn't matter if it's the States or Canada or Mexico or anywhere in Central or South America. Everybody kind of wants to know what you're up to, and people just come up, they approach you, they start a conversation with you, and it's so easy to make a friend in whatever town you're in just by having this big bike with you. And I think that the best experiences, I mean, the riding is great, the scenery is great, but the best experiences that we've had, hands down, have been meeting people along the way, and not just like a one day sort of thing either. Like you meet people, and you know, with how connected the world is now, you can be friends with them. And I'm sure that some of these people that we've met along the way, we'll see them again somehow in 3, 4, 5 years.
We've had multiple incidents of that along the way. For like a couple that we met in Alaska, who we had a 3-minute conversation with in Denali National Park, who then intercepted us in Canada on the Cassiar Highway and pulled over. They told us they were going to be passing us that day. They followed the blog and then sent us a message to say they thought they'd see us on this particular day, and they did, and they fed us some celery sticks and peanut butter on the side of the road. They contacted us again when we were in Oregon and said, "It looks like you're coming in our direction. We live in Bend. Do you want to come and stay with us?" So we stayed with them for 3 days. It was lovely.
And actually, two of the coolest things about this story actually are that, one, the husband, he was originally from Michigan. He was, I think, maybe 20 years or so older than us, but grew up 20 or 30 miles from where I grew up, and turned out, you know, once we got connected on Facebook, that he went to elementary school with our old landlord in Detroit. And then one of my favorite things of the trip was that the last night that we were there, he pulled out some old family movies, and one of them was of his father, who back in the 1960s, he was a Mexican immigrant, and he worked for Ford Motor Company, and sort of just a savant of an engineer, no formal education, but worked his way up into Ford's racing division, and was one of their lead mechanics. And they did this publicity stunt where they took 6 cars down to Ushuaia, Argentina, and drove them up to Fairbanks, Alaska. And they wanted to show, I can't remember what the model was, but they wanted to say, you know, that it's it's the strongest, most dependable car, you know, on the road. And
so they essentially did our route, right? I
mean, they did it. They did it in reverse. Right. Or I guess we're doing their route in reverse. He's got all these really cool videos of his dad that Ford produced, so they were nice quality for the time, and just all about this trip from South America to Alaska. And it's kind of special to like sit and, you know, share a moment like that, you know, with somebody. Like it's a part of their life and their history that, you know, that they're proud of, and then see it connect or intertwine with your own life. Like you get to have a lot of moments like that with people along the way.
And I have no doubt that we will see them again, right? Like at some point we'll meet up in Detroit, and we'll have dinner with them again. Right. We can host them in Detroit. Yeah, That's great.
Yeah, that's cool. That's somebody needs to get that footage and make a movie or something.
It's in Ford's archives, and I think you can actually find those videos online. I think that Ford's put them on YouTube at this point. They're pretty cool.
What about you, Sophie? Your favorite part of cycle touring?
Like the same as Chris just said. Absolutely. I guess my angles may be slightly different in terms of how I interact with people and the way that I perceive people engage with us. So there's something about being on a cycle tour that somehow makes you seem vulnerable, I think. Well, two things: completely non-threatening and vulnerable. So people are absolutely go out of their way to help you. And that's happened in every single place that we've been to. And that it ranges from you're at a gas station and someone winds down their window and a hand pops out and they proffer an orange at you without even saying anything, just give you something to eat, through to, we were in a town that I referenced earlier, and Bisbee, Arizona. The whole arrival in Bisbee was kind of good. So we pull into town. It's pretty clear that there was nowhere to camp because it's set in a canyon. It was obvious that we were going to have a hard time finding a place for our tent. It was also going to be really cold that night, I think I remember. So we went to the bike shop because that's always a good place to try to kind of suss out what's around, talk to someone in the local bike shop. So this guy there, we chatted to him for a while, and he identified a piece of land out the back of his shop that we could stick our tent on. But we went to look at it with him, and it looked like maybe there was someone else. It was like a sleeping bag there. Like maybe there was someone who had already kind of claimed that spot. So we walk across the street to chat to his friend who owns the bookstore. And this guy calls his landlord and identifies or agrees with the landlord that it's fine for us to put our tent on their front lawn. Two people as we roll into town have offered us space to stick our tent. And then we decided to go and grab some dinner before heading over to this house to set our camp up. And as we're having dinner, a woman comes over to our table and says, are those your bikes out there? We were like, yeah. And she said, I have a guest house in town and there's no one sleeping in it tonight, and it just feels right to offer it to you. So would you like to stay in my 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, beautiful house? So we kind of, you meet these people who are all so willing to help you in some way. And I feel like it brings out the most generous aspect of everybody in a way that I don't know, you don't necessarily realize is there in your day-to-day interactions, your day-to-day life, unless you jump on a bike.
Guys, what is next for you?
A big hill.
Yeah, we're in the foothills of the Andes Mountains.
One or two big hills.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of up and down for the next year, I think.
A big. What?
Oh, the Galapagos.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, we're going to the Galapagos.
We have one of probably the major treats of this trip, if not our lives, coming up, which is that my dad, stepmother, and brothers are coming out. So they're going to meet us in Quito mid-September. And my dad will kill me for saying this to an audience, but he's turning 70 next year, and so he's treating the family to a trip to the Galapagos. So it's funny. It's actually quite stressful to have a deadline for all the reasons that you've just heard over the last hour. It's really, really hard to predict when we're going to be somewhere. But on the basis that this would be a trip of a lifetime, we've committed to being in Quito in September. In 6 weeks' time. So yeah, we've got some miles to make up in the next 6 weeks to get down there. And ultimately, if we have to throw our bikes on a bus, we'll do that to get there. So Colombia looks like crazy climbing. Something like we work out like an average of 2,000 meters a day of climbing is what we think we've got coming up.
Right. And that's if we take the easy route.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And then we'll cross the border into Ecuador and shoot straight for Quito to meet my family. So that's really nice.
How can people contact you again if they want to learn more about your adventure?
theplacesip.com.
Do you have social media at all? Are you on Facebook or?
We're on Instagram and Facebook. Same name, The Places IP. I think instead of a space on Instagram, there's a period between each word. Yeah.
We're pretty good at updating it, right? We post most days.
We tend to have a blog post out every week or so. It's usually a few weeks behind what we're actually doing. We write about our stories and stuff as we're going along.
Well, Chris Haag, Sophie George, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story so far of this unfolding adventure from Alaska to Argentina. And I wish you the best and have fun in the Galapagos and continued success on your journey and stay safe out there.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much. This is really fun.
It's been nice. Yeah, it's been a blast.
Thank you once again for listening to another episode of the Pursuit Zone Adventure Travel Podcast. You can find this episode online at thepursuitzone.com/TPZ180. That's TPZ180. The best way to support the podcast is to subscribe and share this episode with your friends. You can find subscription links at thepursuitzone.com. If you're listening on YouTube, be sure to give this a thumbs up. You can like and follow on Facebook or Twitter. The tag is @thepursuitzone. If you want to write to me, you can do so at paul@thepursuitzone.com. You can also leave me a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. This episode was recorded on August 6, 2019. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.